This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. A pickup truck is found idling on a desolate New Mexico ranch road. Headlights on, door closed, but no sign of the driver. Minutes later, just off the path, his wife finds him face down in the dirt, his throat slashed, his body dragged through the brush. No suspects, no witnesses, no motive. And nearly 20 years later, no answers. Hello, Death by Southwest listeners. I'm late in the sense that, well, I'm trying to lower my desk chair in the sense that this was supposed to come out yesterday, and it didn't. So it's coming out today. And because I'm trying to keep personal things out of Tuesday, or in this case, Wednesday episodes, I'm not going to get into it. But I will say that I'm glad to be back doing true crime. I have a very interesting story today. I really enjoyed researching this one. And I've missed you guys. And I hope that everyone is doing well. Everyone who's listening. Again, I want to say thank you for all the support that people showed throughout throughout always. I feel like there's always something, isn't there? I mean, and I want to say, I feel like there's always something going on in my life that's like, oh yeah, it feels dramatic, or it feels like there's something I have to talk about. This is not coming out how I want it to, but hopefully you get what I'm saying. It feels like there is always something. And then I get like self-conscious about that. Like, is it just me? Am I, I don't want to be one of those people, or I don't think of myself as one of those people who's like, when you talk to them, you haven't talked to them in a while, and you talk to them and it's like, oh, well, this happened and this happened. And like, it's such a like energy suck and so draining. Like I really, I don't want to be one of those people. But sometimes when I hop on here, I feel like that because I don't talk to you guys every day. And on weeks when I don't do like a personal bonus episode, then a lot of times I don't talk to you for more than every week. Oh boy, I'm not speaking well right now. Uh, Anyways, let's wrap this very poor intro up by saying thanks for always sticking by me, because I guess there is always something. And you know what? I'm not going to apologize for that. Life is messy and complicated and wonderful as well. And it seems like sometimes there's always something. I'm sitting here thinking, should I scrap this and like re-record this intro? No, I'm not going to. I'm going to make a quick note here though. Okay. So today we are heading to a place of rugged beauty, a place where the mountains meet the sky, but also where a shadow of unsolved mystery has lingered for nearly 2 decades. And that place is Silver City, New Mexico. I do believe we've had a case here before, but I'm going to do a little bit of a sense of place with this because it is a very beautiful and interesting location. So, if you've never been to Silver City, let me paint a picture for you. It's tucked in the high desert on the edge of the Gila National Forest, where the land kind of shifts from like cactus strewn to more pine tree covered hills. And there's not a lot of warning. It just kind of transfers from one to the other pretty quickly. It feels kind of like a place that's stuck in time, but in the best possible way. There's lots of old mining buildings. Everything looks like a little bit weather worn, kind of vintage, if you will. And the sunsets, sunrises, it's just wide open skies like that seem to stretch on forever. It's the kind of town where strangers wave to each other And the folks at the diner know how you take your coffee. Charming, right? But don't let the charm fool you because the terrain out here, like I'm standing in Silver City right now, the terrain out there in Silver City can be very dangerous. It can just basically kind of swallow you whole. It's so vast, it's easy to get lost, and people underestimate how dangerous the desert can be. So to the west of Silver City is Bear Mountain, and that's kind of more specifically where our story takes place today. It's a kind of a brooding, craggy mess that is always casting these long shadows across the valley below. There aren't a lot of people out there. There's a lot of kind of winding dirt roads, some scattered ranches, and stretches of land that feel just completely untouched. It's remote, it's quiet, it's peaceful in the kind of way that if you live in the city, you kind of romanticize the peacefulness of living out on a ranch. But locals know better. It is peaceful, but way out there on Bear Mountain, nature doesn't care if your truck breaks down or if it gets dark before you're able to get home. There are no street lights, no background noise, just the wind, the wildlife, and the ever present hum of isolation. It is beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it's also the kind of place where you could scream at the top of your lungs and no one would hear you. And in 2005, that silence became deadly because somewhere out on and around Bear Mountain, Tim Edwards vanished. And the desert has been holding on to the truth ever since. Our story begins not with a crime, but with a life so vibrant and beloved that its sudden, brutal end sent shockwaves through a quiet community. And we are talking about John Timothy Edwards, who went by Tim. And to his good friends, he went by the nickname Okie, which was a nod to his Oklahoma roots. He was described many, many times by many people as a man who never met a stranger. He was the kind of man that people remembered, not for flashy clothes or loud opinions, but for the way that he made you feel safe, heard, respected. He was a hulking 6'4", kind of built like a linebacker. He had this, which is a very imposing frame, but he had a heart as wide open as the New Mexico skies. He had a booming laugh, the kind that you could hear, down the hallway or in another room. And when you heard it, it made everyone kind of sit up straight or be like, who's that? And despite being built like a lineman, like I said, he was kind of a softie. He had a real soft spot for animals. He loved sunrises and he loved perfectly cooked eggs, because who doesn't love a perfectly cooked egg? He was the guy you called when your gate got busted or your truck wouldn't start, not because he owed you one, but because that's just who he was. He was a big guy with a warm heart and a real presence about him. He was born far from the New Mexico desert in Detroit, Michigan on February 20th, 1943. But his heart and spirit really belonged to the Southwest. Growing up, he was an athlete. He earned a scholarship to Southwestern State University in Oklahoma. And it was there on that college campus that he met the woman that would become his lifelong partner. He met his college sweetheart, Lynn. And for over 40 years, they built a life together that took them across the nation. Now, Tim and Lynn's journey began on the Navajo Reservation in Chinle, Arizona, where they both started their careers as high school teachers. From there, Tim moved on to Central Arizona College, where he really left a mark on that school. For decades, he wasn't just a math teacher there, he was also a coach. I actually believe that I read that he was the head or director or co-director of the athletic department there. And he coached basketball, baseball, football, tennis, golf. And these last two, I didn't fact check. I'm now remembering, and I should have, because it says that he also coached swimming and sailing. And, as far as I know, there's not a ton of sailing in Arizona. So we're just going to skate by that. Now, Tim wasn't one of those teachers who showed up only for the paycheck. He cared. He really cared. He pushed the kids who didn't believe in themselves, and he showed up to every football practice, baseball practice, whatever he was coaching, like it was like church, like it was his religion. He taught math and coached sports, yeah, but more than anything, people really felt like he taught respect, not just how to give respect, but how to earn it. He was the type of man and teacher who never raised his voice unless you really upset him. Like if he was yelling, something bad really happened. And even then, even if he did raise his voice, it was usually followed with a handshake and a piece of advice. He was the type of educator that was not soon forgotten. Students, athletes, colleagues, they all looked up to him and to this day still talk about how he changed their lives. Not with equations or practice drills, but with his patience, his honesty, and the way that he could make even a very, very shy student feel like a champion. And now, years later, his legacy lives on through the annual Tim Edwards CAC Baseball Alumni Golf Tournament, which is just one small testament to the profound impact that he left behind. I took this out of his obituary. He savored a good old Western movie, teaching his grandbabies how to hook a bass, playing golf with his buddies, working on his old trucks, and enjoyed a fun game of kings or dominoes with his family. His love of history, the outdoors, and natural instinct to share and teach all that he knew will forever change and strengthen the lives of us all. Like, I love this man. Learning about him, reading about him, he sounds like the father, grandfather, uncle, whatever, teacher that everyone wants. So he worked in education for 30 years, and after 30 plus years in education, he retired in 1995. Him and his wife Lynn did something that most people only dream about, and I am one of those people that dream about this. They left the city behind and built a quiet life together on the edge of Silver City. They leased a 40,000 acre chunk of land on LSB Mesa. Now, I also saw another article that said it was 1,200 acres, which sounds more realistic to me. 40,000 acres is massive. Either way, they had a lot of land right there on Bear Mountain. Picture rolling hills and really nothing but just space and land in every direction. It was the kind of place where the wind really carried more silence than the sound, and sunsets looked like they were painted by hand. No traffic, no noise, no one to bother you, unless you were somewhere that you weren't supposed to be, or they were somewhere that they weren't supposed to be. Really fumbled that one. Tim and Lynn loved it there. Tim really embraced his new community. He was deeply involved in it. He served on the Pinos Altos Volunteer Fire Department, and he was the president of the Grant County Cattle Growers Association. I feel like I perhaps didn't mention what they were doing on this land. Oh, yeah, they became cattle ranchers. Sorry about that, guys. And they quickly came to understand that this was not just a retirement. This was kind of the realization of a long held dream of working the land, raising cattle, and embracing this kind of serene and demanding life of a rancher. And Tim, he didn't just live on the land, he really respected it. He worked it, he protected it. His days were filled with the simple joys of a man who is content with his life. And as I wrote that, oh, I won't go off on a tangent here except for just momentarily, but think about that. This really gets me a lot. The simple joys of a man content with his life. And I'm thinking about that in the sense of selfishly of myself. Like, am I a woman content with my life? What are the simple joys that I enjoy that help me be content with my life? Am I content with my life? I don't think I'm there yet. I would like to be, but perhaps one day. Okay, we'll leave it there. Anyways, uh, so his days were filled with the simple joys of a man who is content with his life, tinkering on his old trucks, hitting the golf course with his buddies, or spending time with his family. He'd take his dogs out to check on the cattle, to haul hay, to make repairs around the ranch. Sometimes he'd run into people trespassing. Maybe it was a few teenagers out partying or joyriding. And he would always kind of handle it the same way. He would roll up, step out of his truck, and say, "Hey, folks, just letting you know this land is leased. Be careful out there." Wasn't confrontational. He didn't carry a weapon. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He just wanted to keep the peace. And somehow that got him killed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So before we get all into that, let's talk about the last day of his life. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. Friday, December 30th, 2005, just one day before New Year's Eve. Tim woke up early like he always did. There were chores he had to get done, errands to run, hay to load. And Tim and Lynn were preparing to host a little gathering. And hosting was very Tim. He loved planning little get togethers. He loved making people feel welcome, creating a comfortable space for people to connect. This was just kind of his nature. Again, I love Tim. So Tim and Lynn had invited a small group of family and friends to ring in the new year out on the ranch. Nothing wild, just a cozy little get together, maybe grill some things, have a few drinks, a peaceful celebration, the kind of peace that you can only have when your nearest neighbor is like miles away. So that morning of the 30th, Tim drove into Silver City. It was about 20 minutes from the ranch. He picked up the feed and hay, stopped at the store for a few supplies, and, just made his usual like rounds of errands in the city. He was seen by multiple people throughout the day. All of them later told police that he seemed relaxed, cheerful, and just like himself. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing off or suspicious. And at some point later in the afternoon, Tim finished up what he was doing in town and he left town to head home. And that is the last time that he was ever seen alive. Now, again, I just want to remind everybody of this kind of landscape because the land itself plays a pretty big role in the story. So again, their home sits on this sprawling remote stretch off of LSB Ranch Road, which is kind of a rough dirt path that winds like through the desert hills and mountains. There's often no cell phone service. You have to be like in the exact right spot. And there's kind of even fewer signs of life. Like you don't really run into people out here. Now, again, Tim did sometimes occasionally run into teenagers goofing off or whatever on his land, but it was far and few between. Few and far between? Either one. Uh, so it kind of, that like perfect image that they always show, or maybe you picture in your mind when you think of the desert, like just a vast road and like tumbleweeds blowing across it. The terrain is a little bit different than that, but same kind of feel, like desolate. Again, you could scream at the top of your lungs and no one is going to hear you. And that December evening that Tim was heading home, it was cold. It was below freezing, the kind of cold that like you stand outside for just a few minutes and the tip of your nose and your cheeks and your fingers feel like they're going to fall off. I mean, growing up in Chicago, I'm very familiar with that. But even in the desert, it's a different type of cold. But the cold that it gets in the desert, it can drop 40 degrees from the temperature in the morning until nighttime. So it could be 80 in the morning and literally 40 at night. And it's a biting cold. It's cold. So now it's cold, it's dark, it's isolated. And so when Tim didn't come home, Lynn felt like something wasn't right. Now, earlier in the evening, he called his wife, Lynn. He said, "I'm about 30 minutes from home. I'll be home soon." Simple. Confirmed that everything was normal. He was on his way back to their beloved ranch. But when an hour passed, Lynn was like, huh, weird. Not like Tim to be late, especially if he called and said, I'm going to be home in 30 minutes. And then an hour and a half, and then 2 hours. And Tim still hadn't arrived. Now, again, Lynn didn't panic right away. She's going through, maybe he got delayed. Maybe he stopped to talk to somebody. He was a helpful guy. Maybe somebody needed some help. But pretty quickly, telling herself these things didn't quell her worry because Tim wasn't the type of person to worry her. He wasn't careless. He didn't just like disappear. He was never late. He always was home before dark. So when it became dark, Lynn was concerned and she could not wait any longer, just waiting around, hoping he was going to show up. So she got into her car just after 7 p.m. and she drove out into the ever growing evening darkness. And she decided she was going to retrace the path that Tim should have taken from Silver City back to the ranch. And that's when she spotted it. Tim's truck. It was parked weirdly on the side of the dirt road, like kind of crooked. The headlights were still on, but something felt off. She slowed down and stopped. And so she noticed as she slowed down and kind of passed the truck, then to pull over, she noticed that the overhead light was out on the driver's side. So she couldn't really see inside clearly, but she believed she could make out that he wasn't in the truck. Now, there were hay bales and the ranch supplies and the feed and things that he went into town to pick up. Those things were still in the truck. And Lynn's quoted as saying, I drove up, his lights were on, but the truck was off. I honked my horn, and when he didn't appear, I went over to the passenger door and knocked on the window. Nothing. Tim was nowhere in sight. It was like he had literally just vanished in the middle of driving home. Okay, so Lynn's thinking, all right, well, he obviously got out of the car. Maybe he got out to help something, help an animal, help someone. Maybe he needs to pee. She's trying to come up with like some reasonable explanations for this, the way that she found his car and the fact that he's not there. And any of these things could have been true, but she still had that like gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach that something just was not right. So she got in her truck and she decided to keep driving down the mountain into Silver City, hoping that she'd kind of run into him along the way. Like maybe he ran out of gas, maybe, any of the maybes. But she was hoping she would see him on her way into town, maybe at a gas station, somewhere. But he was nowhere. So after she drove through town, she turned around, decided to head back up the mountain, back towards home. And when she reached his truck again, she stopped again. And she walked around to the driver's side door, opened it, and that's when she saw it. Tim's cell phone sitting there on the center console. And that's the moment that it hit her that something was really wrong. Because Tim would never leave his phone. Not like that, not without calling her, not unless something was very, very wrong. Lynn was quoted as saying, this time I went over to the driver's side and opened the door and I saw his phone sitting on the console and I knew he wouldn't have left his phone. I very slowly headed back to the house thinking maybe he fell. And that's a statement that I'm not sure I totally understand. Like, fell where? You know what I mean? But maybe she means that he like got out to pee and fell and couldn't make his way back to the truck, something like that. I actually just thought of that right now as I'm reading this. So Lynn made her way back to the ranch and she was kind of clinging to the hope that he'd fallen. Maybe he'd fallen because, if he had gotten out of his car to go to the bathroom, to help an animal, to help a person, if he had seen a person, who knows, and he had fallen or hurt himself, Lynn probably wouldn't have been able to see him. It's that dark, who knows, the moon may or may not have been out that night, but it's very dark. And right, off the road, there's some kind of wooded area. brush and trees, maybe not like deep, dense woods, but not easy to see at night. So, hence, she's heading home. She's going to get a flashlight. She's going to get some help. So, she got to the gate at the ranch. She called her friend Patty, said, "Grab your flashlight, come over. I need your help." The two of them headed back with flashlights this time to Tim's truck. And this time, instead of searching in and around, like around the immediate truck on the road, they headed towards the woods. Lynn began calling out his name. Nothing. She swept her flashlight back and forth across the brush. Nothing. She kept walking, kind of going back and forth, looking, scanning for any signs of anything. And then something caught her eye. A little glint of glass off the light of the flashlight. It was Tim's glasses, lying in the dirt. And beside the glasses, there was blood. A good amount of blood. So she kept moving the light, walked up to the glasses and is looking around the area, frantically scanning. And that's when she saw him, face down, motionless. His coat was rumpled, dragged out of place as if someone had kind of pulled him through the dirt by it. Lynn immediately ran back to her car and miraculously got a signal. Remember, cell phone service is really, really spotty out here. So she called 911, and while waiting for them to arrive, she ran back to him and knelt beside him in the dark. She rubbed his back, spoke to him, said her goodbyes. She later told reporters, "God intervened on my behalf because they would have never, ever let me see him. I just rubbed on his back and talked to him and got to say my goodbyes to him." Oh, makes me get choked up, guys. Sorry. 40 years of marriage is a long time. When first responders arrived at the scene on LSB Ranch Road, the horror of what happened to Tim Edwards started to take shape. But right off the bat, it didn't make any sense. There was no sign that anything had been taken. His wallet wasn't taken. The vehicle wasn't taken. There was no weapons, no tire tracks, no shoe prints. It was just Tim, face down, dead in the dirt. It was several feet off the road in a patch of brush. And as I said, it looked like someone had dragged him by the collar. So his coat was kind of pushed up and messy. He had been beaten in the head, hit likely with a rock. And his throat had been slashed so deeply that it had nearly severed. Investigators would later describe the killing as personal feeling, overkill, brutal. The level of violence was excessive and seemingly fueled by some type of rage. But Tim wasn't the type of man that incited rage in anyone, like ever. So who could be that angry at Tim? Really, no one. Truly. This guy didn't have enemies. He was never mixed up in anything shady. He didn't even carry a weapon, on his ranch. His reputation was unimpeachable. A man of peace, principle, and the occasional dad joke. And let's not forget, Tim is not a small man. He's 6'4", over 200 pounds. So for him to have been overwhelmed by his attacker or attackers, it was likely an ambush, like that he wasn't expecting. And based on the nature of the injuries, whoever attacked him did it with the absolute intent from the beginning that it would end in death. Friends and neighbors were completely baffled. A few of them had seen Tim confront people. Again, people trespassing on the property or kids out late shooting fireworks or partying, but he never yelled, never escalated. He was always polite. That was it. So what happened this time that was different? Some people wondered, Did he stumble upon something bigger? A drug drop? An illegal gathering? Something that people didn't want him to see? Law enforcement jumped into action immediately after the murder. The Grant County Sheriff's Office brought in additional investigators. They canvassed the area, interviewed people who saw Tim that day, and tried to kind of reconstruct his final hours. Detectives combed the scene, searched the nearby terrain, interviewed ranch hands, neighbors, old students, anyone with even a passing connection to Tim. Unfortunately, they found no usable fingerprints, no DNA, no signs of a struggle near the truck, no tire marks. The ground around where Tim was found was stained with blood, but otherwise it was pretty undisturbed. There was nothing to suggest that he'd even fought back, which was shocking considering that he was over 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds. So that leads us to kind of assume that he was caught off guard, that maybe they attacked him from behind. He was hit in the head, likely with a rock, although I don't believe they ever found that rock. So maybe he was knocked out before he even knew that he was being attacked. Maybe there was more than one attacker. We don't know. All anyone knew for sure at this point is that he had been attacked, he had been dragged, he had been dumped, and he had been left to die alone under that moonless sky. Ah, that's right. I knew I had read that the moon wasn't out that night. So, with little to go on, the Grant County Sheriff's Office began working under one main theory, and that's kind of the theory that I floated just a minute ago, that Tim perhaps came across something or someone that he wasn't supposed to see. Maybe, maybe it was a group of teenagers partying, but like that had happened before, and that's not, that doesn't kind of inspire this type of murder. Likely it was something much darker. Again, a drug drop, an off the books transaction happening like deep in the mountains where no one is supposed to be, no one is supposed to be watching. And then maybe Tim approached them like he always approached people when he saw them, courteous, calm. Perhaps they panicked, overreacted. Maybe they were on drugs. Maybe he said something that set one of them off. Or maybe they didn't really care what he said and they just wanted him gone. But that's the thing. We have no idea. Now, in the days that followed, Lynn found herself surrounded by grief, reporters, detectives, and well-meaning people asking all the wrong questions. But even through her heartbreak, she stayed composed. She was a very strong woman. The funeral was held January 7th, I believe, and hundreds of people showed up, unsurprisingly. Lynn sat right in the front row, flanked by friends and family, staring down a reality that she hadn't chosen, and she still couldn't believe that the love of her life was gone. Not just gone, but murdered. And at this point, she had no answers, no closure, and a ton of questions spinning in her head. She did cooperate with investigators and she made statements to the press. She gave interviews in the hopes that someone, anyone, would come forward. She's quoted as saying, "It's hard. Every time I tell the story, it's like it's happening again. But if it helps someone remember something, if it helps bring us closer to the truth, it's worth it. I know my husband. He would not have provoked anyone. He might have walked up and said, 'You folks need to head out,' and then gone back to his truck, but he wouldn't have escalated anything that just wasn't who he was." And it really wasn't, according to literally everyone who's ever known the man. He was a steady, unshakably calm guy. So the lingering question of who could have done this to him really rocked this entire community. When someone is murdered this violently, this savagely, people assume there's got to be a reason, right? A motive, or a fight happened, or someone holding a grudge, or there's a love triangle, something. But for Tim Edwards, it truly seemed there wasn't a reason. Investigators were looking into, like his life, his past. Nothing. There didn't seem to be any good reason that they could find. And the investigation really faced some significant challenges right from the jump. The isolation of the location made it difficult. The fact that there was no immediate witnesses, no real evidence, and the crime itself was just so brutal. It left so many questions behind. Law enforcement did follow up on every tip, and there were a lot. They got a lot of tips. They interviewed neighbors, former students, random ranch hands, even out of state acquaintances. They traveled across the state from Santa Fe to Santa Rosa, pursuing every lead they had. But every lead seemed to lead back to the same thing, and that was nothing. Now, in a small town like Silver City, rumors have a half life of forever. Whispers and theories ran rampant in the community. People talked about everything from local meth labs to satanic cults to a group of drunk kids whose very rich parents covered up their crime. I mean, and honestly, a lot of these theories didn't sound that far-fetched. There was a rumor going around that there was a party happening nearby, and Tim had gone to ask them to leave. That one doesn't make sense to me because, again, he'd done that countless times. Like he had found people on his property many, many times before, asked them to leave, and it had never been an issue. Now, could it have just suddenly become an issue this one time? Sure, of course. Just seems like the least likely option. There were another story going around that there was an unidentified vehicle spotted in the area that night, but that never amounted to anything even tangible because who started that rumor? There was no one there. And there were definitely a few people that police interviewed that they felt were kind of like evasive and not being totally honest, but there was nothing more than just that kind of feeling that somebody wasn't being totally honest. There was nothing they could pursue there. No one cracked, no one folded, no one shared really anything about that night because supposedly no one was there, which then begs the question, well, who murdered him? Which is the whole point of this whole story. So police were frustrated. This was seemingly going nowhere. That is until a man named Alan Snyder came forward with what sounded like a game-changing tip. In a taped statement given to detectives, Alan said that his son, Michael James Snyder, had left the home after a family argument and returned about 9:30 p.m. and told his dad that he was the one who killed the man on Bear Mountain. Now, that wasn't the night of the murder. This happened apparently on January 4th, so days after the murder. So everyone in town already knows about this murder. So he got in an argument. This Michael James Snyder got in an argument with his family, left, came home at 9:30, and immediately said to his dad, I killed the guy. I killed the guy on Bear Mountain. Now, Michael was a known meth addict. He lived near Bear Mountain, and he worked at an auto body shop. Now, a known meth addict, not exactly a model citizen, but fine. So the affidavit said that Michael James Snyder showed his father how he attacked the man from behind, that he raised his arms and simulated striking the victim in the back area. He told his dad that the guy that he killed was at the wrong place at the wrong time during a drug deal gone bad. And when police asked Alan if he thought his son was capable of killing someone, he said yes, because his son had been using meth and had threatened to kill family members. And his son also knew the Bear Mountain area very well because he grew up there and grew up hunting in those woods. So, if this was true, it would seem that like the case was cracked wide open. Detectives obviously brought Michael in. And at first it seemed really promising. He told investigators that yes, he'd been on LSB Ranch Road the night Tim was murdered. According to him, he was with two men and a woman, and they were engaged in a drug deal when things escalated. He claimed that he did not kill Tim, but that he did witness the murder. And then in the very next breath, he denied being there at all. So, not a great start. Police did arrest him and held him on a $2 million cash only bond, hoping this would finally give them the breakthrough that they needed. While he was being held, Michael tried to kill himself several times and was put on suicide watch. And so then came the competency exam, and it did not go well. Michael was found mentally unfit to stand trial and unreliable as a witness. His story changed so many times, investigators couldn't separate delusion from deception from the truth. Still, they wanted to try and track down the people that he claimed were there that night, if any of this was even true. But they had nothing else, so they decided they were going to try and follow this story from this meth addict. The two men that Michael talked about, they were never found, or maybe they never existed. But the woman, she was real. Her name was Tammy Patrick, although she also went by Tammy Dyer. And she and Michael had been romantically involved at the time of Tim's murder. Police tried to contact her repeatedly, but she was slippery. She missed interviews, dodged phone calls, and at one point she basically vanished into the desert for a while. Like no one could find her at all. They eventually caught up to her in Belen, New Mexico in March and brought her in for questioning. But whatever she said or didn't say clearly didn't help because she was let go and that lead went absolutely nowhere. And as months turned to years, Tim's case slowly slipped into that heartbreaking category that we all know too well: cold. At one point, Lynn and others pushed hard to get the FBI involved, especially as the years ticked by with no resolution, but the Bureau declined to take the case. Why, you ask? Because the murder didn't meet the threshold for federal involvement. It wasn't a kidnapping. There were no signs of interstate crime, no terrorism, and no obvious civil rights violation. It was just a local homicide. Cool. So a man was just viciously slaughtered and dumped in the dirt, but FBI is not interested, which I say that lightly because the FBI obviously can't get involved in every local homicide that happens. What would be the point of that? So frustrating, but also understandable. Now, between 2006 and 2009, Tim's murder was featured on America's Most Wanted, not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. As you might expect, each episode brought in new leads, tips poured in from all over the country. Some sounded promising, some were completely out of left field. One led detectives, detectives were following up on these too, even the ridiculous ones. They were traveling out of state. There was a group of people that might have known something that detectives went to interview. None of it panned out. Not a single tip brought them closer to an arrest. Not a single person claimed to have seen what happened that night. And to this day, no one has come forward. No one. It's been it's been 20 years, not almost. And not a single person has confessed to knowing, seeing, hearing anything. Nothing. Which at first I read an article that made a big deal out of this. And I was like, well, okay, why would somebody confess? If they're getting away with it, they're getting away with it. They're not going to want to confess. So I don't think that's super shocking. But the fact that unless that killer moves through life completely in isolation, has no friends, no family, no acquaintances, doesn't speak to anybody, doesn't lives completely off the grid, someone would know something. The person who did this would have said something, would have acted weirdly, would have had blood, like somebody would know something. And not one single person has come forward with any credible knowledge of this crime, which, I mean, I guess points to the fact that the circle of people who knew or know what happened is very, very small. I still find it hard to believe that one person by themselves could have done this, but who knows? Through these 20 years, Lynn has never stopped pushing. She's spoken to reporters time and time again. She's trying to keep Tim's story alive and answer every question that anybody might have and just keep it. She's just reliving the worst night of her life. I mean, more times than anyone should have to try and keep this story alive and find who did this. In a 2017 interview, she said, I want to know. I need to know. Somebody out there knows what happened, and I'm not going away until I find out. Now, Lynn stayed on at the ranch. She stayed there by herself for 7 years after Tim's death, um, sadly trying to hold on to the dream that they had built together before she finally sold the ranch in 2012. I read some accounts that she stayed in Silver City and others that said she returned to Arizona. Wherever she was, her heart certainly never left Silver City. And she still visits the spot where she found him. And locals still talk about the murder, how Tim didn't deserve what happened, how it makes them wonder what evil could still possibly be lingering in those hills. Those hills that were the land that he loved, the quiet, the solitude. It all feels different now, haunted, because excuse me, somewhere out there, the person or people who murdered Tim are walking free. And we don't know who that is. This is what we do know. Tim was not the kind of man to start a fight. He was not the kind of man to carry a weapon. He likely did come across something that he shouldn't have seen that night. Honestly, probably a case of wrong place, wrong time. And whoever was there, they got away with murder for now. Now, in the weeks after Tim was murdered, Silver City did what small towns do in the face of a tragedy. They gathered, they hugged, they brought food, they cried, and they talked. Not just about the brutal and senseless murder, but about who Tim was, how he was the kind of man who gave small towns their soul. And then in the years after Tim's death, his memory still persists. I mentioned earlier that former students and colleagues organized a memorial golf tournament in his name that still happens to this day. It's not a flashy event. There's no press. It's just people showing up to remember a man who really meant something. And that's what the story ultimately comes down to. It's not about the killer or the crime, but the man, Tim Edwards, beloved teacher, dedicated coach, husband, neighbor, rancher, and a man who spent his life building people up and never tearing them down. And someone out there decided to end that life, that beautiful life, with violence so unimaginable and brutal that it still to this day shakes Silver City to its core. Because when you lose someone like Tim Edwards, it doesn't just hurt the people who actually knew him. It chips away at that whole community because you lose the feeling of safety. And that changes everything, especially for a small town. So I know that I've talked about this before. You guys know that I've kind of questioned the ethicality, and that is a word. I looked it up. The ethicality of sharing these stories. And if you've been a listener for a long time, you know that this podcast did not start out of like my deep love of true crime. I do love true crime. I had never even considered having a true crime podcast. It was not like a passion project. It was part of my job. I was asked to start a true crime podcast. And I did, and I found that I really enjoyed it. And now it has 100% become a passion project. And you guys have become a huge part of my life. That's not what I'm talking. That's not the point of this conversation, though. Um, but I've struggled with, is it even right or fair, or, you know, am I just playing into the kind of exploitation of these stories, and how horrible for the families, or is it helpful? And in this case, with this story, and it changes for every story for me, honestly. I haven't settled on like one side of that coin. Sometimes I feel like this is this isn't right. I shouldn't be doing this. And sometimes I feel like, well, this is good. I'm honoring the person and bringing more attention to their case. And for this case, I do feel like that's true. I do see the value in sharing some of these stories, not to retell the horrors of what happened, but to remind people that some of these cases are not over. Yes, to tell them because Tim and all of the victims deserve to be remembered, not for how they died, but for how they lived. And the hope, I think, is that over time, things change. So, whereas someone may not have come forward 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, you know, the people involved, maybe their allegiances, their loyalties change. Maybe there was multiple people involved and one of them died, and now the other person can clear their conscience. Who knows? Or maybe someone listening right now, someone driving in their car or cleaning their house, maybe they overheard something once that they weren't supposed to. Maybe this, you know, piques something in their brain that helps them remember a detail that they had since forgotten. Might be helpful. Either way, telling this story helps keep it alive and helps keep that hope alive that maybe someone will come forward at some point. Although I don't think Tim's memory is really in danger of fading. He was so deeply beloved, and his memory continues to resonate and serve as a stark reminder that even in the most serene landscapes, darkness can strike. And hopefully one day the truth will emerge and bring accountability for his brutal murder. And I read this quote by Lynn that kind of solidified my feeling that this is good to get this out there. She said this about kind of wanting to keep the story alive. She said, "It's almost like an obligation. I will do anything to keep this case alive. I need to know exactly what happened." And she's still holding on to, the hope that at some point in time, the people responsible will be held accountable, and there will be a judgment day. So if you happen to know anything that may be helpful to this case, please call the Grant County Sheriff's Office or the Grant County Crime Stoppers. Both numbers are in the show notes below. And that's it for today. I'm really glad I came across this story and got to tell it. I actually couldn't find a single other podcast on this story. I always like to check on Apple Podcasts before I decide on doing a story. I'll type in the victim's name, see if it's something that's been super widely covered or hasn't gotten a ton of attention. And I could be wrong, but I couldn't find any podcast that had covered this story, which absolutely blows my mind, because every victim story deserves to be told. Certainly, Tim was such a beloved man. I am shocked that this hasn't come out before, or maybe it has. Either way, there it is. That's the story of Tim Edwards, and I thank you for listening. If you are loving Death by Southwest, please subscribe, leave a review. Both of those things really help the podcast. And as always, stay curious, stay safe, and come back next week for more true crime. I'm not even going to say what day it will be out because I always just end up tripping myself up if I do that. But there will be true crime next week. And again, I really do appreciate and love all of you guys who take the time to listen, who continue to listen, who put up with the ups and downs of this podcast and the ups and downs of my life that seep into this podcast. Yeah, that's all. Not going to get all mushy. I'm going to end there. I'm working on more solid and quick goodbyes. So, goodbye. Love you all. Hope you're having a fantastic week, and I will talk to you soon. Okay, bye.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, "Good night and good luck."